Good evening. Welcome to Thursday Book Club. I'm coming to you from Gadigal land and I pay my respects to elders past and present. For anyone new today listening or listening to the recorded version, my name's Suzanne Leal. I'm the author of 5 novels, most recently The Watchful Wife and Running with Ivan. I started Thursday Book Club during the 2020 COVID lockdown as a way to connect with readers online. And sometimes to my surprise, also to my delight, 3 years on, we've continued to meet weekly. We've become great friends and we have people who dip in and dip out, which is exactly how I hoped it might be. And we have a guest writer that comes to visit us every month. For those of you who are here by accident almost, if you'd like to join the community and be on the database, please go to my website, which is just my name, suzanneleal.com. Now, as I said, I usually interview guests myself, but to my delight, tonight the tables are turned and the wonderfully generous Jane Caro will be interviewing me. Now, for those of you who know Jane more from sight than from her very impressive CV, just let me give you a sneak preview of some of her highlights. Jane Caro AM is a Walkley award-winning Australian columnist, author, novelist, broadcaster, advertising writer, documentary maker, feminist, and social commentator. She's published 13 books, including Just a Girl, Just a Queen, and Just Flesh and Blood, a young adult trilogy about the life of Elizabeth Tudor, and the memoir Plain Speaking Jane. She's created and edited Unbreakable, which features stories women writers had never told before and was published just before the Harvey Weinstein revelations. Her most recent non-fiction work is Accidental Feminists, which is a sobering and fascinating read about the fate of women over 50 and the levels of homelessness that occurs because of a life spent caring. The Mother, as many of you will know, is Jane's first novel for adults, which has gone extremely well. And just last week, she received the B&T Women in Media Lifetime Award. Hello to you, Jane, and congratulations.
Thank you. I think the Lifetime Achievement Award is what they give you just before you drop dead. So, or they hope you drop dead. So let's hope that doesn't happen tonight.
Yeah, we'll wait till afterwards, Jane.
Wait till after. Yeah. Once I hit leave, I can drop dead. Okay, good. Yes, thank you. And I'm very much looking forward to talking to you again, Suzanne, about The Watchful Wife. That's part of the reason why when Suzanne asked me, I thought, well, I can't really say no. I've already read the book, forensically. One interview, I can certainly do another one. That's fine. And also, I'm genuinely really enjoyed reading the book. And when I say genuinely, that means that sometimes I have to do gigs and things where I don't genuinely have enjoyed the book. I'm sure, Suzanne, you've had that experience as well. But in this particular case, I really found it wonderful. And in fact, I'm a fan of Suzanne's. I love The Deceptions. I love The Teacher's Secret. I find your work very readable, very insightful and pertinent. And you get at things and you surprise me. So I look forward always to the next Suzanne Leal. So I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, Jane.
So I'm going to interview Suzanne, but I'm keen to hear from, because it is a book club. It's not a seminar. So I'm keen to hear any questions or any comments that people have in the chat, which I can introduce into our conversation. I'm assuming most people here, given that it says book club, have read the book. Good. That's helpful because, if you're Writers' Festival and, most of the audience haven't, that leads you into having a different kind of discussion.
So I think there are some people who haven't, and of course for the recording, so probably not assume people know what happens.
Okay. I won't assume people, well, I'm not going to do any spoilers.
Good. Okay.
I know the rules, but nevertheless, that is helpful to know that you've got some people in the audience who've read the book. I mean, the thing that got me straight away when I started reading it was obviously the character Ellen Wells, who captured my heart straight away. And I think, you know, it's very well done the way you make her this outsider, this vulnerable girl with a, well, I'm sorry, frankly, an abusive pair of parents, particularly her mother, stuck in this rigid religious sort of semi-cult, I suppose, and struggling with the outside world. And I wondered why, you know, do you have an affinity with the outsider, with the person on the margins, the person who watches and observes, wants to be part but doesn't know how?
Yeah, I think I do. And I would think that I'm not alone as a writer in that. I think to be a writer, you need to be curious and you need to observe and you need to like being alone. And I think, is that something that you have innately, or is that something in an environment? If you've been a little bit on the outer, you get used to being alone and then you enjoy being alone. I think for me, I grew up in Wollongong, and I went to a public girls' school called Smiths Hill High, which was very good to me and for me. But I was a bit of an odd fish in Wollongong. So my father was an academic, and it was when I was growing up, particularly sort of working class area, and that's, you know, a lot of the people in my school were, and also they were. You know, it's a beach culture, and with both my figure and my skin, I'm not a beach babe. So I think, and I was kept, you know, well out of the sun. So I think those sort of things where, you know, mine weren't parents that partied or drank. They were quite religious, but progressively so, and all that means that rather than partake in things, you listen, and you know, it was a good upbringing. And I say academic success wasn't particularly rated at school, so you had to save yourself with something else. So I saved myself with running. So if you were a runner, that was okay. So yeah, I do think there's probably some of that in me.
And you often write about schools and that kind of an environment, which I have a particular interest in. So I find that fascinating. And I mean, the school that Ellen attends, I mean, there are some nasty people and kids and things, but basically it's a fairly benign environment. And there are some teachers who recognise her difficulty, her isolation, her lack of ability to wear the kind of clothes and, you know, participate in a lot of the things that the other kids can do. And they help her to find ways around it and to find safe places. And I thought I liked the way you presented what I think is true about a lot of teachers, their recognition of the outsider and their desire to not bring them in, but make sure they don't suffer too horribly for being that kid who watches rather than participates. You do that beautifully.
I think I was writing, I think during COVID, like I was doing like the kids book and also this one, and I often thought, like, my kids were at home, and that was fine, because I mean ours is it's a pretty happy place. My husband's he's a really easy bloke. Like with me alone, it's less, it's less fun, but with him, it's fun. And so we managed having, you know, this blended but nuclear family to do COVID. And I used to think, how's it happening for kids whose house is really unhappy? How is it going for those children who had school as a refuge and who had a school as somewhere to escape to? What's happening when you've got an angry father who's drinking too much, or absence, or you've got a single parent who's really struggling, who's got to work, and so I'm wondering if subconsciously I sort of put myself in Ellen's position, and because, you know, she's got her parents are her mother's pretty awful and her father's pretty hopeless, probably, I would say. And
He's kind of absent in a way, emotionally, and
if she would had been there, if she hadn't had school, and how would that be?
and you demonstrate that really well, that school is actually for her a window onto another way of living.
Yes.
And there's another character, of course, who's in the church, and that's Miss Habler, who also gives her a window and it's a beautifully drawn picture of a timid rebel. Someone who can only rebel just a little bit, but does that rebellion. I love that, because we don't think a lot about the small rebels, and yet they probably have created more escape hatches for people than the noisier ones, and Miss Habler is very much about that.
I think often I think nuns can be like that as well, because I'm not Catholic and I didn't grow up with nuns, so that they were always sort of an almost a mystical, magical.
I thought they were weird. I couldn't get my head around them at all. I still have a problem.
When I was 10, we went to Assisi in Italy, because my father, as an academic, was a French academic, and we were sort of stationed in France for his research. And we went to Assisi in Italy, where you can see dead St. Francis and dead Teresa, I think it is. Am I right there? Is it Francis and Claire? And I was fascinated, because it seemed such a romantic story where they were, wedded to God and yet working together. Anyway, so I became quite fascinated by nuns, and it seems to me that whilst someone from the outside, non-Catholic, would see nuns as conformist and initially wearing the habit, conforming to a pretty tricky Catholic church in a lot of ways, it seems to me that there are many nuns who make changes within a straitjacket, or within very sort of limited boundaries. And that's, I suppose, what I wanted for Miss Habler too, because she's a woman who hasn't married. She's a woman whose church hasn't allowed her to do very much or give her much liberty, but they're her community. And without that community, even if it's not necessarily a freedom-giving community, she's lost. So that's what I wanted to that's why I wanted to explore how many people stick to a community because it is theirs, even though it doesn't necessarily do them good.
Yeah, because it's what they know, and the people in it, despite their limitations, they love, absolutely. And you get that across very strongly. But she also really helps to create, she can't escape herself. She may choose not to escape herself, but she creates the possibility of escape for Ellen. And one assumes perhaps for other children that she's taught, she's given that impetus. And you made me think of, I come from a atheist family, but on my mother's side, Methodist, and my grandmother was one of those people who outwardly conformed, but via deception, basically kept the doors open for her daughter and herself to have some sort of independence. It had to be manipulative and it had to be lied about, but it was still there. And I think that's very much the way female power was able to be exercised until relatively recently. And Miss Habler is doing a bit of that as well.
And I think outwardly. Perhaps I hadn't actually thought of the connection before you said that, but in the deceptions, I think what I was trying to do was to explore whether deception is necessarily an evil, or whether deception can be the greater good. And I think that's probably a smaller theme here too, where there are deceptions, there are lies, there's poor behaviour, but is that necessarily something to be condemned, or is it something to be admired? So I quite like that balance where it's a bit uncertain.
Well, is it a deception or a rebellion? And I think when you're dealing with authoritarianism, the deception is the only way to exercise any freedom or autonomy. You can't. That's what authoritarianism does. It forces everyone into deceit because you haven't got any other avenue. And Ellen does kind of make her way through this extremely oppressive upbringing, and then she meets Gordon, who basically, I mean, it's a wonderful love story. It's and she becomes a teacher. So also that those female occupations, nursing, teaching, that kind of thing. Miss Habler is a Sunday school teacher. That gives her some autonomy. The classroom remains an independent space where the teacher can, really create an atmosphere that reflects their own personality. The powers that be still hate that. They still want to cut that down. That's what all that explicit teaching and, all that stuff's all about. No, can't let the teachers do what they want. But they always will, thank God. And I think she becomes a teacher, and that's how she meets Gordon, a fellow teacher. And that's such a lovely love story. And he sees through all the crap about the clothes and the, having to be modest and the kind of, I could see Ellen. You made me think of girls I went to school with who had to wear their hair a certain way and, weren't allowed to wear. Their parents made them objects of ridicule almost on purpose. And he sees through all that. Tell us about Gordon and his family and what that does for Ellen.
Thank you. Gordon, I enjoyed creating Gordon. So I see him as a very good-looking man, a very tall, good-looking man who would turn heads and who would be in the cool group, but for the fact that he had a stroke, which leaves him with a limp. It's just on the leg. I mean, the arms are fine, and that changes the way he's seen, and perhaps the way he sees himself as well. So, I mean, what I was interested in is to see the older girls in the playground in a high school looking at this new teacher, but not being quite sure how to react because there's this clear disability, which I don't think we always deal with well, particularly when we're confronted with something different before we get to know it. So I needed someone that for Ellen was a plausible partner.
Yes, he couldn't be too much Mr. Rochester.
No. He needed to have, and when he gets nervous, he stutters a bit. And when you've got, a physical impediment, you're open to being teased, and kids are often the most cruel for that. So I wanted to bring someone he'd had a loving family life, which was unlike Ellen's, and super Catholic, which for a sort of an uber Protestant is horrific. I mean, it's heathen, and
yes,
I even know, for perhaps not me so much because we've travelled a lot and I saw a lot of Catholic churches, but if you've been brought up in a church where there are no paintings, there are no statues, it's all very austere, very Amish, and you come into a house and there's like 10 statues of the Virgin Mary. I mean, it's almost like having an hallucination. So I sort of hammed that up a little bit, that this was a sort of a, but I've been to those houses, this house where there are trinkets.
They've got the bleeding heart of Jesus painting. Yeah.
And like sort of big Madonnas and little ones and ones on the shelves. And the thought of being part of
snow domes. No, sorry.
Oh, Lord, yes. And those 3D postcodes. And so what I wanted to do was to see how Ellen could look beyond that, and how she managed to be embraced into a family. And I think when you haven't had a lot of physical affection, and I'm reading a book, reading Susan Duncan's book, The House on the Hill, the memoir, and also this novel, Sleepless in Stringy Bark Bay. And she describes one character who won't let herself be touched, and it almost wrecks her, or appears to have wrecked her marriage because of it. And so I wanted to work out how a girl like Ellen, who becomes a woman, can learn to become physically affectionate, and how it is, and how that affects a sexual relationship. Because there's a lot of undoing you need to do in such a rigorous childhood.
Absolutely. I think perhaps the Catholic exuberance helped a bit with that. We're running out of time really rapidly, so we better get to the pointy end. But of course, the love story all goes horribly wrong. And what you do is so interesting, because you take the whole Me Too, Believe Women, all of that, and you literally turn it on its head, and you ask the question, what if you, as a woman, caring about those things, the man you love is accused of doing the very thing that would most horrify you? And I think the knee-jerk response would be to condemn the woman who's stuck by the guy. And yet in this book you do that, and you and I was annoyed as a reader. I went, oh no, Carrie, and that was good, because you pull it off. I'm not going to spoiler alert what happens, or any of that, but I really love the way you make us think about love, intimacy, relationships, trust, belief in not just the person that you love, but your judgment in loving that person, and loyalty, and also that how Ellen, being an outsider and an observer and a watcher, actually is the key that solves the mystery, and basically undoes the mischief that's being done. I love that you drew all those threads together so neatly, and yet so unobtrusive, so subtly, so that I couldn't see it happening until it happened, and then I kind of understood it. It's very clever, and you take us to today, but in a completely different way from how perhaps most novelists might approach that subject.
I think it's exactly what if I wanted anything, I wanted to force you down a path as the reader that you didn't really want to go down, and weren't sure what you thought or how you thought, because you hopefully, if I've done my job right, you like Ellen, you like Gordon.
Oh, Ellen's a cook. Yes, absolutely.
Follow, and then it's like, I don't want to be here. And that's what I think it is about with grey areas, where that's exactly right. Because I think it's become very easy with social media and just perhaps the way the world is, to have an on and off switch. This is good, this is bad, and it's always, it's dangerous, but it's always more interesting to work out where the line is, I think.
And yeah, exactly right. Well, I kept thinking of the character in The Mother, Sally, who's the mother of Nick, the coercive controller, and I often think there's a novel in her. And I'm thinking also, just in today's, like the recent headlines about the mother of the Spanish football head honcho, who's gone on a hunger strike in the church, and saying that her son is being persecuted. And so these are the women who believe the men that the rest of the world don't believe. It's a really, it must be a terrible place to find yourself. I have no idea whether they're right, wrong, or indifferent, but nevertheless, a novelist's job is to say, what if, and what would it feel like? And what if that happened to me? And I think that's what you do so beautifully in The Watchful Wife.
And I think, and just before we go for questions, I think what the work that I do, and the work that I've done over a number of years, puts me into touch not only with people who are accused of a crime, but the entourage. So and that's, it's a bit like a social event. If there's a big name there, often it's nice to talk to their partner, because their partner might not know so much, many people might be looking for conversation, and often, if this person they're married to is interesting, they'll be interesting as well.
And they get ignored a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So now that was a point for something I was making, which has gone out of my head. Yes, it was. Oh, yes. So it was on the side. So rather than looking at the accused or the victim or the complainant, whoever they are, if you just look at what's going on behind that,
The ripples.
Yeah. So as a criminal lawyer, the family were the people I'd contact mostly, particularly if someone's in jail. And on other jobs, it's the family members who attend with their with their people. And I thought, it's the wives who are really interesting, because the wives are caught up and they're blamed as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It must be. And you communicate the shock that goes along with that as well really well. There is something in the chat. I'm going to have a look at it. There's a whole show to be had about Lewis. I'll be stoned by the feminists. Feminists don't stone people. We get stoned. Name me anyone a feminist has killed apart from themselves. There aren't any.
Good. Done.
Yes, there is a whole show to be had about Lewis. He's a boy who was brought up to believe that he could do no wrong, I guess, and his mother's kind of backing that up now.
It is interesting having the mother and on this stage, this world stage.
It's a very, I mean, I understand her. I get that how you would feel like that, but I'm not sure it's the most effective tactic.
Well, I hope she doesn't die.
Well, yeah, somebody feed the poor woman.
While we're waiting for another question or two to come, what we like to do, Jane, is ask our guests for 3 book recommendations that I can put in the newsletter. Did you have some you could recommend to us?
Yes, apart from The Watchful Wife, of course, which is fabulous. I have 3. One I've just finished, and I'm very fortunate because I get sent uncorrected proofs because people want me to read them and give them a kind of endorsement. And sometimes that's a joy and sometimes it's not so much of a joy, but I've just finished one that's a joy, and it's by Karen Viggers, and I can't show you the cover because I've just got it in a, binder like that, but it's called Sidelines. And I don't know that I would have read it except that I have to, because it's about teenagers and football teams, and I'm not interested in football teams, and I'm a long way past teenagers, but it's riveting. It's really, really good, and it's really about today and how driven we all are and how anxious and how much pressure we put on our children and how much pressure we put on ourselves as parents, and people's ambitions and living through others and aggression and competition. It's really, really, I was riveted. It's really, really good. So that's the first one, Sidelines by Karen Viggers, who's a lovely, lovely novelist. The other one is another one that I read because I got asked to do a conversation with the authors at the UNSW last year. And this is by an Australian, Jennifer Robinson, who is a human rights lawyer. She's currently defending working with Julian Assange to stop him being extradited to the US. And another human rights lawyer from Japan, Katie Yoshida. And it's How Many More Women. And it's chilling. It's absolutely riveting. There's lots in here about the Brittany Higgins case, but it was written about almost a year ago. So it's not totally up to date with what's happened, but it's still absolutely apropos. And it's basically about how the law is being used globally to silence women about sexual assault via the use of non-disclosure agreements and defamation laws. And it made me feel sick reading it. I mean, it's quite terrifying how power is being used to shut women up. And this is also a proof copy. I never buy books anymore. They just send them to me. So sorry, it's not the proper cover. I think the proper cover looks like that.
Yeah.
This is by Anne Patchett, and it's her latest, Tom Lake. And I really thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a terrific Oh, what exactly is an uncorrected proof? An uncorrected proof means it hasn't been fine-tuned in terms of the final edit, but it's just about at publishable stage. So it's the last stage before it actually goes to the printers to be turned into the book proper. It's the last stage for checks and changes. So, and you always find mistakes. You've pored over the bloody manuscript more times than you could possibly think of, and there's 3 spelling mistakes, 4 commas in the wrong place, and words transposed, and you get the name wrong somewhere. Incredible, even in the uncorrected proof. But that's what they tend to send you from publishers.
But another question from Katrina. When did you start writing, Jane, and what did you write? And then what are you writing now? So before and now.
I suppose I've written all my life, really. I never really thought that I was much good, and I ended up working in advertising as a advertising copywriter, and I did enjoy that. That was kind of fun, and it taught me a lot of skills, particularly brevity and getting to the point, which have come in handy. But I've always been writing things, but it wasn't until I'm a late bloomer, I think, and it wasn't until I was really in my late 40s, early 50s that I felt I had anything that I was prepared to show to a publisher. And that's when I started to get published. What am I writing now? I'm writing a crime novel. Nothing to do with the mother, so it's just an idea I had, and so I'm persevering with that. I'm not going to tell you much more about it, except it's got a fairly interesting concept in it and lots of twists, and it deals with human trafficking, gambling addictions, middle-class hypocrisy, all sorts of things.
Whet my appetite. We've got a question from Dina Davis, who's also a writer. What is or was your writing practice, and how did you manage to...
This is to you, Suzanne. I haven't written 2 books simultaneously.
Is that right, Dina? Is it for me? Okay. My question above is for Suzanne.
There you are, Dina. I knew.
Okay, so my writing practice is I try and give the best of myself to writing. So I try and work. If I haven't got much time, I just, even if I'm on deadlines for other stuff, which I probably should do, I'll do 2 hours at least writing. And if I can, I'll do more. I'll do 3 hours, but I'll tend to do it early. And then the other stuff where you don't need to think as hard, or you get a bit fidgety when you're writing. So I do that. The idea of writing them simultaneously, I think, probably is a bit of a myth, because the books have a publishing schedule. So Running with Ivan, for example, was to have been published the year before, but then it was pushed back to the February. So it was to have had one in June, and then the next one in July, or even in February. So then, because for a variety of reasons, the kids' book got pushed forward, then the adult book gets pushed forward. And you'll know this, Jane, too. I mean, it's a bit like, it's a bit like any work practice. You're dealing with one thing, and then you're waiting. So you put in the manuscript, you give it to the publisher and see if they want it, and that can take anything from 3 weeks to 6 months.
That's right.
And to stop yourself getting nervous in that time, the best thing to do is just get back on the saddle and start writing again.
See, I envy you that. I can't do that. I have to know what's happening with the book I've finished. I have to get it all sorted. I have to promote it. I have to see out before I can even think about doing the next one. Okay. I can't do it. Like, I just don't know what it is. Laziness.
When you've got the waiting period, so you just you do speaking, you do other parts of...
I do other things. Yeah, I've got columns to write and all that kind of stuff, and I just do all of that, and I wait to see. And I think I've got to feel like the book that I've just finished is finished. Do you know what I mean? It's come to its, and then you kind of birth it and you send it out into the world.
So you're more like a human baby carrier, rather than kangaroos that can have like an
yes.
fetus.
Yes, I can only have one.
I'm more kangaroo, maybe.
No multiple births for me. No. That's the thing. We're all different. That's the thing about writers. I don't think anyone's the same as any other writer, or they have to do it their own weird way.
Good question, Dina. Look, I'm going to let everyone go off to have a bit more of an evening, and I know Jane's been flat chat, and so I reckon maybe it's a glass of wine or something.
I'd say so. It's that time, isn't it?
I've got somebody else who's come. It's a little bit late, but anyway. It's funny actually. I was just say hello, Mel. We're just about to finish, but we're recording the session, so please watch it on my YouTube channel. What I was going to say, I'm interviewing Susan Duncan, and she said, I'd like to buy you something. What do you like to drink? And I'm not a really big drinker, but our neighbours who've been here next door for 50 years and moved out gave us all the alcohol they hadn't touched for 40 years, including a bottle of port. And I really liked it. So I said, oh, maybe some port. And she said, my God, I haven't had port since I was, a teenager, sort of swigging it
Port
up.
and lemon. That's right. I quite like sherry. You can't buy decent sherry very much anymore. A really good sherry is fantastic. Can't drink much of it. You're on your ear in no time at all, but it's beautiful.
There you go. Okay, look, on the note of sherry and port, Jane, thank you so much for
We're
your
not retro, are we? Yeah.
It's so I'm so appreciative of the support you give to me and so many other writers, and looking forward to.
And vice versa, you interviewed me, so what goes around comes around.
Looks like next one I'll be interviewing you for is the twisty turny crime novel.
Yeah, its working title is Lyrebird, and I'll leave that with you.
Like that. Oh yes, I'll look forward to reading that. Thank you everybody else for coming, and hope you have a good rest of your week. Thanks again, Jane.
Bye. Thank you, Suzanne. Bye, everybody.